Have you ever found yourself in the depths of pain or hardship, asking that most human of questions? Why? When must we experience suffering at all? It's a question as old as consciousness itself, yet one we often push aside in our daily lives. Until, of course, suffering finds us again. I'm not here to offer easy platitudes or suggest that suffering is somehow simple to understand. Each of us carries our own unique burdens, our own stories of pain. But through the centuries, brilliant minds have grappled with this fundamental aspect of existence, and their insights might just help us navigate our own dark nights of the soul. Today, we're diving deep into philosophical perspectives on suffering, not to eliminate it from your life, but perhaps to find meaning within it. And I promise, by the end of this video, we'll explore some perspectives on suffering that rarely get discussed in mainstream conversations about well-being. Let's begin with the Buddha, whose entire philosophy centered around the reality of suffering. The first noble truth of Buddhism states it plainly: life contains unavoidable suffering, or dukkha. But the Buddha didn't stop at acknowledging suffering. He proposed that our attachment to desires, outcomes, and even pleasure itself creates much of our pain. When we cling desperately to what we want or resist what is happening, we amplify our suffering. Consider how often we suffer twice. First when something painful happens, and then again as we mentally replay it, resist it, or anxiously anticipate more pain. The Buddha suggested that by practicing mindful awareness and releasing our attachments, we can reduce unnecessary suffering. Not by denying pain exists, but by changing our relationship to it. This doesn't mean becoming emotionless or detached from life. Rather, it's about developing equanimity, the capacity to be with what is happening without being overwhelmed by it. Think about a time when you finally accepted a difficult situation instead of fighting against it. Didn't a certain peace emerge, even within the challenge? Moving westward to ancient Greece, the Stoics offered another compelling framework. Philosophers like Epictetus and Seneca argued that suffering comes largely from our judgments about events, not the events themselves. We suffer not from the blow of fate, wrote Epictetus, but from how we judge it. The Stoics distinguished between what we can and cannot control. We cannot control external circumstances, illness, loss, the actions of others, that we maintain sovereignty over our responses. This isn't mere positive thinking, it's a profound recognition of where our power truly lies. When you lose a job, for instance, the fact of unemployment is neutral. Your suffering comes from judgments like, "I'm a failure," or fears about the future. By questioning these interpretations rather than accepting them as truth, you create space for wise response rather than blind reaction. If you're finding value in these perspectives on one of life's most challenging questions, consider subscribing to this channel and hitting that notification bell. Each week, we explore philosophical ideas that can transform how you navigate your existence. Not abstract theories, but practical wisdom for living well. Now, let's turn to existentialism, a more modern perspective championed by thinkers like Viktor Frankl, who endured Nazi concentration camps yet emerged with profound insights about human suffering. Frankl proposed that our primary drive isn't pleasure or power, but meaning. Those who are the why to live, he wrote, can bear almost any hell. Existentialists suggest that suffering without meaning crushes the spirit, but suffering with purpose can be endured. This isn't to glorify suffering or suggest it's necessary, but to recognize that when unavoidable suffering arises, finding meaning within it can transform our experience. Consider the parent who endures sleepless nights caring for a child, the athlete who pushes through physical pain toward a goal, or the activist who bears hardship fighting for justice. Their suffering is contextualized by purpose, making it bearable and even meaningful. But what about seemingly senseless suffering? What about chronic illness, random tragedy, or systemic injustice? This brings us to one of the most nuanced perspectives rarely discussed in casual conversation: suffering as an inevitable feature of consciousness in an imperfect universe. The philosopher Thomas Nagel suggests that the very capacity for suffering evolved alongside consciousness itself. To be aware is to be vulnerable to pain. Our sensitivity to suffering, Our ability to anticipate it, remember it, and reflect on it is interwoven with our intelligence and self-awareness. The same consciousness that gives us art, love, and wonder also enables profound suffering. This perspective doesn't justify suffering or make it good, but it helps us understand it as intrinsic to conscious existence rather than a sign that existence is fundamentally flawed. Just as we cannot have mountains without valleys, we cannot have conscious experience without the potential for pain. Perhaps most radical is the perspective offered by certain philosophers that suffering can be transformative. Not all suffering transforms us, of course, some nearly crushes. But suffering can crack open our certainties, dissolve our ego defenses, and connect us to our deeper humanity. Many who have endured great hardship report that it stripped away what was superficial in their lives, clarified their values, and deepened their capacity for empathy. As Leonard Cohen wrote, "There is a crock in everything. That's how the light gets in." This transformation isn't automatic. It requires conscious engagement with our pain rather than mere endurance or denial. It asks us to remain open and curious even within suffering, to ask not just, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What might this be teaching me?" None of these perspectives negates the reality that suffering hurts. None suggests we should seek out suffering or remain in harmful situations we can change. Rather, they offer frameworks for relating to the inevitable pains of existence with greater wisdom and resilience. We suffer, in part, because we are finite beings with unlimited desires, living in imperfect bodies, in a world we cannot fully control, alongside others who are equally complex and flawed. But within these constraints, we can develop tremendous capacity for grace, meaning, and even joy. Perhaps the question isn't merely why we suffer, but how we suffer. Do we suffer consciously or unconsciously? Do we use suffering as a catalyst for growth or allow it to diminish us? Do we suffer alone or in community with others who can both witness our pain and remind us of our inherent wholeness? As we close this exploration, I invite you to reflect on your own relationship with suffering. Not to glorify it or resign yourself to it, but to engage with it intentionally, with curiosity rather than fear. What meaning might you find within your challenges? What wisdom might be contained? If you found value in this discussion, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more explorations of life's deepest questions. Share your own perspectives in the comments below. What frameworks have helped you make sense of suffering in your life? Check the description for ways to support the channel and continue these important conversations. Remember, philosophical perspectives don't eliminate suffering, but they can transform our relationship to it. And sometimes that makes all the difference.